Hello, I'm doing a book review, and the book I want to review is Godzilla, the Half-Century War. Now, Godzilla, the Half-Century War is a graphic novel written and illustrated by James Stokoe. I hope I'm saying that name right, and the book was published by IDW Comics, and it was published, I believe, in 2013. Now, Godzilla, the Half-Century War is a spin-off of the Godzilla film franchise. Now, if you've been watching my videos recently, you know I've been doing a bunch of Godzilla-related videos up until the new one comes out, and so I decided as my next Godzilla video to review this graphic novel. Now, I know there's been a bunch of Godzilla spin-off comics over the years, but so far this is the only Godzilla comic I have actually read. Now, Godzilla the Half-Century War acts as kind of a sequel to the original Godzilla movie, but it ignores the continuity of all the other Godzilla movies except for the first one. However, it does incorporate a lot of elements from the other Godzilla films. So the basic plot line of Godzilla the Half-Century War is it's set over the course of 50 years, and it follows a man named Ota who spends 50 years of his life trying to kill Godzilla, hence the title of the book, The Half-Century War. So the book begins in 1954, which is when the events of the first movie were supposed to be taking place, and it follows Ota and his friend Ken, who are both young men in the beginning of the book, and they're soldiers, and they have to fight Godzilla in Tokyo, and what happens is they manage to save a few people, but later on they find out that Godzilla was destroyed by some kind of secret weapon. Now, in the comic, they don't actually mention what this weapon actually was, but of course if you saw the original Godzilla film, you know it was the oxygen destroyer that killed Godzilla, but later on they find out that another Godzilla may be showing up, and it's this other Godzilla which essentially carries on the rest of the story. So the book follows this main character Ota and his friend Ken over the course of 5 decades, and it's a much more psychological book than you might think, because it really focuses on the obsession that this main character has with trying to destroy Godzilla, and by the end of the book, you do get a weird sense that this character, in a weird way, kind of almost respects Godzilla, even though they are enemies, and, you know, it's a really interesting book because you follow this main character and his friend from basically the beginning of his life, or at least when he was a young man, all the way to when he's an old man, because he's an old man by the end of the story. So in the story, Ota and Ken end up becoming part of a military group called the AMF, who is a group specifically made for fighting Godzilla, and what happens is, throughout the course of the story, other monsters start showing up, and there is actually a human villain in the story. In the story, there's a corrupt scientist named Dr. Deverich. I think I'm saying his name right, I'm not sure, but basically he's a scientist who used to work for the AMF, and he ends up creating a machine that actually attracts monsters, and he uses this as his weapon, and there's actually a part of the story where he tries selling this weapon to terrorist organizations, which I find to be really interesting, the idea of a terrorist actually using giant monsters as his weapons, which kind of adds to the whole idea of Godzilla and the other monsters being an allegory for nuclear weapons. Now, what I really like about this book is it really shows the destruction that these monsters cause on a global scale, because the book doesn't just take place in Japan, the book actually takes place in a couple of different countries all around the world. Now, another thing I like about this book is it really does show how destructive these monsters can actually be, and how devastating the destruction that these monsters cause can actually be, because by the end of the book, it pretty much is the end of the world, because you realize that these monsters completely fucked up the planet, and by the end of the book, there's only a few human survivors left to fight Godzilla and the other monsters, and there's actually a picture here in the book of what the Earth looks like after the monsters completely destroy it. You know, so it really does show the monsters' destruction on an apocalyptic level. Now, the monsters that show up in this book are, of course, monsters who already showed up in the Godzilla movies, but the monsters that show up in this book are, of course, Godzilla. You also get an appearance from Anguirus in this book. You also get appearances from Megalon, Mothra, Rodan, Ebra, who is the giant lobster from Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster, Hedorah, and you even get an appearance from Batra, who is the evil Mothra from Godzilla and Mothra, The Battle for Earth. You also get an appearance from the giant tarantula from Son of Godzilla, and you also get Mega Godzilla, who shows up in this book, and even Space Godzilla, and you also get appearances from King Ghidorah and Gigan at the end of the book. Now, what I think is really cool about this is you can definitely tell that Stokoe was a very big fan of Godzilla, because this book includes a lot of references that I think only, like, really hardcore Godzilla fans would get. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Godzilla franchise is essentially broken up into 3 different series. There's the Showa series, the Heisei series, and the Millennium series, and I guess this new Godzilla movie, if it ever makes sequels, will possibly be the beginning of a whole new series of Godzilla films, but officially there are 3 Godzilla series, and this graphic novel combines elements from all 3 Godzilla series all into one. Like, for the most part, this book seems to take inspiration from the Showa series and the Heisei Godzilla series. However, in this comic, Godzilla is drawn to look like how he did in the Millennium series. So as I said, it basically combines all 3 Godzilla series into one. But yeah, I really enjoyed Godzilla the Half-Century War. Not just is it a great comic for Godzilla fans, but it's also a really good character study on the main character of Oda. So yeah, if you're a Godzilla fan, I definitely recommend checking out Godzilla the Half-Century War, and bye.